I didn't cheat! You stole the answer!
Justin, how could you?
I didn't! You're lying! Security!
Steve Harvey had spent years standing beneath the bright lights of Family Feud. He had watched contestants forget answers they had practiced all week. He had seen grandparents dance across the stage, children scream when the board revealed a #1 answer, and entire families collapse into hugs after winning fast money. After thousands of contestants and countless tapings, Steve believed he had seen almost every kind of surprise that could happen on that stage. But one afternoon, something happened that had nothing to do with winning points, nothing to do with the survey board, and nothing to do with the prize money. It began with a single sentence from a husband to his wife. A sentence he probably thought nobody would challenge. Steve heard it. And the game stopped. The studio was packed that afternoon. Hundreds of audience members filled the seats while music played and cameras moved into position. Crew members rushed across the stage checking microphones, lights, and podiums. Two families waited beneath the enormous Family Feud board. On one side stood the Henderson family from Atlanta. They were loud, confident, and clearly excited to be there. On the opposite side stood the Morales family from Phoenix. At first glance, they looked like any other family appearing on the show. They smiled, they waved toward the audience, they clapped when Steve walked onto the stage. But if someone had watched the Morales family closely enough, they might have noticed something beneath the smiles, especially in the eyes of Linda Morales. Linda was 52. She had spent most of her adult life taking care of other people. During the day, she managed a cafeteria at a public school. Several evenings each week, she cleaned office buildings. She had been working both jobs for more than a decade. Her children had begged her countless times to slow down. Linda always gave them the same answer. Maybe next year. But next year always brought another bill, another repair, another unexpected expense. And Linda kept working. People who knew her described her as the person who remembered everything. Birthdays, doctor appointments. Who liked what kind of cake? Which neighbor needed groceries after surgery? Which coworker had a child graduating? Linda could remember everybody else's problems, while somehow convincing herself that her own problems weren't important enough to mention. Standing beside her was her husband, Derek. Derek was 54. He wore a neatly pressed shirt and carried himself with the confidence of someone who expected to be listened to. He rarely entered a conversation quietly. If somebody told a story, Derek had a better story. If someone explained something, Derek usually found something to correct. If Linda spoke too long, he interrupted. If she made a mistake, he pointed it out. And sometimes, even when she did something well, he found a way to make it smaller. Their children had noticed it for years. Marcus, their 26-year-old son, stood near the far end of the family line. Their daughter Destiny, 23, stood on the other side. Both loved their mother deeply. And both had learned something growing up in the Morales home. When Derek's mood changed, you paid attention. Marcus had learned to read his father's expression before speaking. Destiny had learned when to change the subject. Linda had learned something different. She had learned how to make herself smaller. She rarely challenged Derek, rarely argued, rarely raised her voice. Instead, Linda absorbed the comments and kept moving. That was how she survived difficult moments. Smile, stay calm, keep going. The Family Feud appearance had actually been Destiny's idea. Months earlier, she had submitted an application describing their family. But most of what she wrote was about her mother. She wrote about Linda waking before sunrise, about working at the school, about cleaning offices after most people had gone home, about coming back exhausted and still asking everyone else how their day had been. When producers called, Destiny nearly screamed. Linda's reaction was completely different. Her first question was whether they would need to buy expensive outfits. Destiny laughed. "Mom, that's what you're worried about?" Linda shrugged. "I don't want everybody spending money because of me." Destiny stared at her for a second. Then she said something Linda remembered all the way to the studio. "Mom, can you please just let something good happen to you?" Linda finally agreed, and now she was standing beneath television lights beside the family she had spent most of her life holding together. When Steve Harvey walked onto the stage, the room exploded. He greeted the audience, joked with both families, and quickly got the game moving. The opening rounds were fun. The Hendersons started strong. The Morales family answered back. Marcus got a solid answer that put points on the board. Destiny made Steve laugh with one of hers. But Linda surprised everybody. She was good. Really good. She listened carefully to each question. She didn't overthink. She gave the kind of answers ordinary people actually gave in surveys. During the second round, Linda landed one of the highest answers. The board lit up. The audience cheered. Linda covered her mouth. Steve pointed toward her. "Oh, y'all better watch Mama over here." The audience laughed. Linda laughed too. For a few seconds, something changed in her face. The tiredness disappeared. The nervousness disappeared. She looked almost younger. She looked like someone enjoying herself without wondering what anybody else thought. Destiny noticed immediately. She smiled across the podium at her mother. Marcus started clapping. Derek didn't. Instead, he leaned toward Linda and quietly said something. Nobody else seemed to hear it. But Linda did. Her smile faded only slightly. Then she faced forward again. The moment passed. At least, everybody thought it had. The next round began. Steve stepped toward the center podium. "All right," he said. "We asked 100 married people." The audience immediately started laughing. Steve waited. "You already know this is going to be trouble." More laughter. Then he read the question. "Name something a wife does that drives her husband crazy." The audience reacted with cheers and groans. Steve looked between the contestants. "Don't get yourself divorced trying to win this game." The buzzers were ready. Linda reacted first. Her hand hit the button. Steve turned toward her. "Linda." She thought for only a moment. "Talk too much." The room laughed. Even Linda laughed at her own answer. Steve raised his eyebrows. "You said it." "I didn't." He turned toward the board. "Survey says." The answer appeared. 31 points. One of the top answers. The Morales family celebrated. Destiny grabbed Linda's arm. Marcus shouted from the end of the line. Linda gave a small fist pump. Then Derek leaned toward her again. "You should have said spending money. Everybody knows that's number one." Linda looked at him. Only for a second. Then she looked back toward Steve. She didn't answer. Steve hadn't heard that comment. The cameras kept rolling. The Henderson family eventually took control of the round, leaving the Morales family trailing as the game entered another critical question. Nobody in the audience understood what was about to happen. Steve read the next prompt. "Name something people usually say right before they embarrass themselves." Laughter spread through the studio. Steve shook his head. "I know some people who got a whole vocabulary for this." Hands moved toward the buzzers. Linda hit hers first again. Steve pointed at her. "Linda, what you got?" She smiled. "Watch this." The audience erupted. Steve doubled over laughing. "Watch this." He pointed at the board. Survey says. The number one answer appeared. The studio exploded. 47 points. The Morales family had just taken a major step toward winning the round. Marcus jumped. Destiny clapped wildly. Linda laughed, looking completely shocked that she had nailed another answer. And that was when Derek spoke. This time, he wasn't quiet enough. He leaned toward his wife and said, with irritation in his voice, "You got lucky. Stop acting like you're so smart." Linda's expression changed immediately. Derek continued, "Just shut up and play." The microphone caught it. So did Steve. The laughter inside the studio faded, not instantly. At first, only the people closest to the stage realized what had happened. Marcus stopped clapping. Destiny froze. Linda's smile disappeared. Steve had been turning toward the scoreboard. He stopped halfway. For a second, he didn't move. Then he slowly turned around. Anyone familiar with Steve Harvey knew the difference between his television expressions. There was the confused look he gave ridiculous answers, the shocked look, the laughing look, the look he gave contestants when he knew they were about to say something crazy. This wasn't any of those. He stared toward Derek. The room grew quieter. Linda looked straight ahead. That reaction told its own story. She didn't argue, didn't ask Derek why he said it, didn't appear surprised. Instead, her body became still, almost automatic. Like this was a situation she had learned how to survive a long time ago. Steve walked back toward the family. He lowered his microphone slightly. "Hold up." The stage became completely quiet. Derek shifted his weight. Steve looked directly at him. "What did you just say?" Derek gave a short laugh. The kind people sometimes use when they're trying to make something uncomfortable sound harmless. Nothing, Steve. We're just playing. Steve didn't smile. No, I heard you. Derek looked toward Linda, then back at Steve. I was joking with my wife. Steve nodded slowly. A joke? Yeah. Steve glanced toward Linda. Linda still hadn't said anything. Destiny's eyes had already started filling with tears. Marcus looked down. Steve returned his attention to Derek. Your wife just gave the number one answer. Derek didn't respond. Your family is on national television. Everybody is celebrating. And the first thing you decide to do is tear her down? Derek opened his mouth. Steve raised one hand. I'm asking you. Derek shrugged. That's how we talk. Steve's expression hardened. No, that's how you talk. The audience reacted quietly. A few people clapped. Steve wasn't performing now. The jokes were gone. He turned toward Linda. Ma'am, how long have y'all been married? Linda swallowed before answering. 28 years. Steve stared at her for a moment. 28? She nodded. Yes, Steve slowly looked back at Derek. Then he said, I need you to step back. Derek looked confused. What? Step back. Nobody moved. Steve pointed toward the rear of the family line. You can stay with your family. You can play this game, but you are not going to stand here and disrespect this woman while I'm standing 4 feet away. Applause began somewhere in the audience. It spread slowly. Derek's face tightened. I told you we joke like that. Steve shook his head. She wasn't laughing. That sentence changed the room. Derek looked at Linda. For perhaps the first time since the comment, he actually looked at her expression. Linda's hands were clasped in front of her. Her eyes were wet, but she was fighting every tear. Steve stepped slightly closer to Derek. There's joking, and there's humiliating somebody. Those are two different things. The applause grew. Steve continued. A woman doesn't work beside you, raise your children, build a home with you, and stand with you for 28 years so you can make her feel stupid when she does something right. Marcus lifted his head. Destiny wiped her cheek. Derek said nothing. Steve pointed again. Take one step back. This time, Derek moved. The audience applauded harder. Steve waited until Derek had repositioned himself. Then he turned completely away from him. His attention went to Linda. The tone of his voice changed. Miss Linda. She looked at him. You okay? Linda nodded too quickly. I'm okay. Steve studied her. You sure? She took a breath. Then she nodded again. I'm sure. But this time, something was different. Her chin lifted slightly. Steve noticed. So we're gonna finish this game? A tiny smile returned to Linda's face. Yes, good. Steve pointed toward her. Because you're carrying this team right now. The audience laughed and applauded. Linda finally laughed too. Steve then looked toward Marcus and Destiny. You two good? Marcus nodded. Destiny wiped another tear away. Steve smiled gently. I know that's your mama. Destiny nodded. Yes, sir, you proud of her? Destiny didn't hesitate. So proud. Linda looked toward her daughter. Destiny mouthed something. I love you. Linda pressed her lips together, trying not to cry. Then, Marcus stepped slightly closer to his mother. Steve looked toward the audience. All right. We got a game to finish. The applause became louder. Then something unexpected happened. People began standing. First one section, then another. Within seconds, much of the studio audience was on its feet. Linda looked around as though she didn't understand who they were applauding. Then she realized. They were applauding her. She pressed one hand against her chest. Her eyes finally filled completely. She whispered, "Thank you." Steve gave her a moment. He didn't rush the applause, didn't crack a joke, didn't tell the audience to sit down. He allowed Linda to stand there and experience something she rarely received. Recognition, not for working 2 jobs, not for raising 2 children, not for cleaning offices after midnight, not for quietly carrying her family, but simply for being treated like she mattered. When the audience finally sat down, the game resumed, and from that moment forward, Linda played differently. She wasn't suddenly loud. She didn't become aggressive. She didn't try to prove anything. She simply stopped hesitating. The next question came. Linda answered. Points. Another question. Another strong answer. Marcus noticed it. Destiny noticed it. Even Steve noticed it. Linda no longer glanced toward Derek after speaking. She looked at the board. She looked at Steve. She looked toward her children. But she stopped checking her husband's reaction. And something about that made her stronger. The Morales family began closing the gap. A 30-point deficit disappeared. Then they moved ahead. When the final answer of the main game appeared, the Morales family had won their way into fast money. Destiny screamed. Marcus wrapped his arms around Linda. Linda laughed. Steve walked toward them. Look at you. Linda shook her head. I can't believe this. Steve pointed at her. You better believe it. You did half the work. The audience cheered. Derek remained near the back of the family. He clapped quietly. He hadn't spoken since Steve confronted him. Soon it was time for fast money. Linda was chosen as one of the 2 family members. She walked toward the podium. The lights shifted. The audience quieted. Steve stood beside her. Ready? Linda breathed in. I think so. Steve smiled. No thinking now. Just answers. Linda laughed. Okay, the clock started. Question 1. Linda answered instantly. Question 2. Another quick response. Question 3. She hesitated for barely a second. Answered. Question 4. Answer. Question 5. Answer. She completed the round with time still on the clock. Steve looked impressed. Miss Linda came to play. The scores began appearing. First answer. Strong. Second answer. Even stronger. Third answer. One of the most popular responses. The audience grew louder with each reveal. Linda covered her mouth again. But this time, she wasn't looking toward Derek. She was looking toward Destiny. Her daughter was crying openly now. Marcus had both hands on his head. The second fast money player came out. The family needed a manageable number of points to win. One answer appeared. Then another. The total moved closer. By the final question, they were only a few points away. Steve stretched out the suspense. The audience shouted. He looked toward the board. If this answer is worth enough points, the Morales family is walking out of here with the money. Linda closed her eyes. Steve turned. Survey says. The board flashed. They had done it. The studio erupted. Marcus ran toward his mother. Destiny reached her first. Linda disappeared inside the hug. For several seconds, all anyone could see were arms wrapped around her. Steve walked over. Linda looked up at him. She was laughing and crying at the same time. You did it, Steve told her. Linda shook her head. We did it. Steve smiled. No, I mean you. She stared at him. Steve continued. You came out here and did what you came to do. Linda wiped her face. The prize money mattered. Of course it did. For someone who had spent years calculating bills down to the last dollar. Winning money like that was significant. But Linda would later remember something else more clearly. She remembered Steve stopping. She remembered the silence. She remembered a room full of strangers standing. And most of all, she remembered the strange feeling of realizing that what had become normal inside her marriage didn't look normal to everybody else. After the taping, the family returned backstage. The atmosphere was uncomfortable. Crew members congratulated them. Producers handed them paperwork. Destiny barely left her mother's side. Marcus remained close too. Derek was quiet. Eventually, Linda found herself standing alone near a hallway while Destiny spoke with a producer. Steve happened to walk by. He stopped. You all right? Linda smiled. This time, there were no cameras directly in front of them. I'm okay. Steve nodded. Then Linda surprised him. Thank you. Steve shook his head. You don't have to thank me. I do. No, ma'am. Steve pointed toward her. You gave the answer. You won the points. You stood up there. Linda looked down. I don't mean the game. Steve became quiet. Linda continued. Sometimes you hear something long enough, you stop realizing how it sounds. Steve understood immediately. He didn't ask for details. Didn't ask what happened at home. Didn't try to turn himself into a counselor. He simply said, don't forget how that room reacted. Linda looked at him. Steve continued. 500 strangers heard one sentence and knew you deserved better than that sentence. Linda nodded slowly. Then Steve walked away. Destiny returned a minute later. What did he say? Linda smiled. Something I probably needed to hear. That evening, the Morales family returned to their hotel. The prize money should have been the only thing anyone talked about. Instead, there was an uncomfortable silence. Marcus finally broke it. Dad, why do you talk to Mom like that? Derek looked at him. This again? Marcus didn't back down. No, not this again. I'm asking. Destiny sat beside Linda. Derek sighed. You all are making one joke into some big thing. Destiny shook her head. It's not one joke. Derek looked at her. She continued. It's years of jokes. Linda stared at her daughter. Destiny's voice trembled. You think we didn't hear it growing up? Marcus nodded. We heard everything. Derek became defensive. So now I'm some kind of monster? Linda finally spoke. Nobody expected her to. No, everyone turned toward her. Linda's voice was quiet. But they are right. Derek stared at her. For 28 years, Linda had avoided conversations exactly like this one. She knew where they usually went. Derek would become defensive. She would become tired. Eventually, she would apologize just to end the argument. This time, she didn't apologize. She simply said, You don't speak to me kindly. Derek opened his mouth. Linda continued, You haven't for a long time. Silence filled the hotel room. Destiny reached for her mother's hand. Derek looked away. The conversation didn't magically repair 28 years. Real life rarely works that way. There was no dramatic speech that solved everything, no perfect apology, no instant transformation. But for Linda, something important had happened. She had said the sentence out loud, and once spoken, she couldn't pretend she didn't know it anymore. The episode eventually aired. Viewers reacted strongly to the moment Steve stopped the game. Clips spread online. People replayed the instant Steve turned around after hearing Derek's comment. Some praised Steve for intervening. Others focused on Linda. They noticed how still she became, how quickly her expression changed, how familiar the situation seemed to her. Comments appeared from women saying they recognized that reaction. Some wrote that their mothers reacted the same way. Others said they had spent years doing it themselves. Destiny saw those comments. One evening, she showed several to Linda. Linda read them slowly. Then she put the phone down. That's sad. Destiny looked at her. What is? So many people understanding it. Destiny squeezed her mother's hand. Maybe understanding it helps. Linda thought about that. Maybe it did. For years, Linda had believed strength meant enduring everything quietly, working harder, complaining less, keeping the peace. But after the show, she began considering another kind of strength. Speaking, a week after the episode aired, Linda did something almost unheard of. She took several days off work, not because she was sick, not because somebody else needed her, because she wanted time. Destiny came home. They spent an entire afternoon cooking together. Marcus called that evening. The three of them talked for more than an hour. Nobody discussed money. Nobody discussed family feud. They talked about ordinary things. Then Marcus said, Mom, you know you don't always have to be the strong one, right? Linda laughed softly. Somebody does. Marcus answered, No, that's the point. Linda didn't know what to say, so she listened. Over the following weeks, small things began changing. Nothing dramatic enough for television, but important. At work, Linda spoke more during staff meetings. When a parent became rude toward one of the cafeteria workers, Linda stepped in immediately. Please don't speak to my staff that way. The parent looked surprised. So did Linda. Afterward, the employee walked into Linda's office. Mrs. Morales? Yeah? That was awesome. Linda smiled. Thank you. She started attending a women's group at a community center near her neighborhood. At first, she told herself she would go only once. Then she returned the following Thursday, then the next. The meetings weren't about blaming anyone. They were simply a place where women talked honestly. About work, marriage, children, exhaustion, regret, dreams they had postponed, lives they had built around everyone except themselves. Linda mostly listened during the first meeting. During the second, she spoke for 5 minutes. By the fourth, she stayed afterward talking with another woman in the parking lot for nearly an hour. Her children noticed the difference. Destiny told Marcus, "Mom sounds different." Marcus understood immediately. "Better?" "Yeah," Derek noticed too. Linda stopped laughing automatically when he made comments at her expense. Sometimes she simply looked at him. Sometimes she said, "That wasn't necessary." The first few times, Derek became irritated. Linda didn't argue. She didn't need to. She had learned that setting a boundary didn't require a courtroom argument afterward. A few months later, someone asked Linda what she remembered most about Family Feud. They expected her to say winning. She didn't. They expected her to mention Steve. She didn't choose that either. She said, "The audience." The person looked confused. Linda explained. "When everyone stood up, I remember thinking, why are they standing?" She laughed softly. "It took me a second to realize they were standing for me." That moment stayed with her. For most of her life, Linda had been the person standing for everyone else. Standing in the cafeteria, standing at a second job, standing in the kitchen, standing beside hospital beds, standing at graduations, standing behind her children whenever they needed support. That day, hundreds of strangers stood for her. And the feeling changed something. Steve would later reflect on moments like that when speaking about his years on television. Comedy was entertainment. Game shows were entertainment. But occasionally, something real entered the room. When that happened, the lights and cameras became secondary. People watching television didn't always remember who won a round. They remembered moments when someone finally said what everybody else had been thinking. Linda's story became one of those moments. Not because Steve Harvey rescued her. He didn't. Linda had survived 52 years without Steve Harvey. She had raised 2 children, worked 2 jobs, managed a school cafeteria, paid bills, carried responsibilities most people never saw. She did not need somebody to give her strength. She already had strength. What she needed was something much smaller. A reminder. A reminder that being strong did not mean accepting disrespect. A reminder that love and humiliation were not the same thing. A reminder that spending 28 years beside someone did not make every behavior acceptable. And perhaps most importantly, a reminder that her voice deserved as much room in the world as anybody else's. Months after the show, Linda's life still looked ordinary from the outside. She still woke early. She still worked at the school. She still packed lunches. Still remembered birthdays. Still checked on her children. Still worried about bills. But there were differences. She no longer worked every available extra shift. Some evenings, she went home. Sometimes she sat outside with coffee. Sometimes Destiny called. Sometimes Marcus did. Sometimes nobody needed Linda Morales for anything. And Linda began learning that those evenings mattered too. One night, she returned home after her community meeting and stood in the kitchen. The Family Feud prize check had long since been deposited. Part of it had gone toward debt. Some went into savings. Linda had bought almost nothing extravagant for herself. That didn't surprise anyone. She poured herself a glass of water and looked toward the dark window above the sink. For years, she had measured her value by what she could provide, how much she could endure, how little trouble she caused, how many problems she solved. Now she was beginning to ask a different question. What did Linda want? She didn't have a complete answer. But for the first time, she believed she was allowed to ask. And it all traced back to one afternoon beneath bright studio lights. A survey question. A number 1 answer. A cruel comment. A host who heard it. A room that went silent. And hundreds of people who eventually stood. Sometimes life changes through enormous events. Sometimes it changes through a sentence. Steve's sentence had been simple. He had drawn a line. Not here. Not like that. And Linda's sentence later that night had been even simpler. You don't speak to me kindly. 28 years of silence were sitting behind those 7 words. She didn't know exactly what would happen next. But she knew one thing. She wouldn't return to pretending she hadn't heard herself say them. The woman who arrived on Family Feud had spent decades making everyone else comfortable. The woman who left understood something new. She could be kind without disappearing. She could love people without accepting everything from them. She could care for her family without sacrificing her own dignity. She could speak. And somewhere in that noisy television studio, between applause, cameras, survey answers, and flashing lights, Linda Morales finally remembered something she should never have been allowed to forget. She mattered too. And maybe that's why the moment stayed with so many people. Because somewhere, watching from a living room, bedroom, hospital room or phone screen, someone recognized Linda. Maybe they recognized their mother, their sister, their friend. Maybe they recognized themselves. Someone who had spent years being told they were too loud, too sensitive, too foolish, too difficult, or simply not enough. Someone who had learned to stay quiet because staying quiet seemed easier than fighting every battle. And maybe seeing one person finally treated differently reminded them of something important. Respect should never feel like a reward. It should be the starting point. Linda walked onto that stage hoping her family might win a game. She walked away with prize money. But the most valuable thing she carried back to Phoenix couldn't be deposited into a bank account. It was the memory of hearing an entire room reject something she had spent years accepting. And sometimes that is how change begins. Not with a perfect ending, not with somebody magically fixing your life, just with one moment that makes it impossible to keep seeing yourself the same way. For Linda Morales, that moment happened beneath the lights of Family Feud. And after 28 years of making herself smaller so everybody else could feel bigger, she finally began taking her space back. One answer at a time. One boundary at a time. One quiet, certain sentence at a time.